The governor's bride fled on her wedding night and found her salvation in a mafia boss's arms. The reflection in the floor-to-ceiling mirror of the presidential suite did not look like a woman in love. It looked like a statue carved from alabaster and draped in $20,000 of silk and lace. Elena Ward stood perfectly still, her hands clasped in front of her, staring at the stranger in the glass. The gown was a masterpiece of design, a structured bodice that cinched her waist until taking a deep breath felt like an act of rebellion, flowing into a skirt that cascaded around her like a pool of heavy cream. It was the dress every woman in the state would envy tomorrow morning when the photographs hit the newspapers. To Elena, it felt like a shroud. At 28 years old, Elena was the picture of poise. She had high cheekbones that caught the light just so, dark hair swept up in an intricate chignon that would not move even in a gale, and eyes that had learned the art of looking interested even when she was terrified. She was a product of her environment, raised in the rarefied, oxygen-thin air of high-stakes politics. Her father had been a senator, and her mother was a kingmaker who viewed children as extensions of a campaign strategy. Elena adjusted the diamond necklace at her throat. It was a gift from him, Charles. Governor-elect Charles Mercer, the man the public adored. They called him the Silver Fox of the Polls, a charismatic savior with a dazzling smile and a firm handshake that promised stability. He was 50 years old, distinguished and powerful. To the voters, this wedding was the culmination of a modern fairy tale. The beloved leader was taking a beautiful, well-bred wife to stand by his side as he ascended to greater heights. But the silence in the room was deafening. Elena pressed a hand to her stomach, trying to quell the nausea that had been her constant companion for the last 3 months. Her mother, Patricia, bustled into the room, a whirlwind of taffeta and hairspray. "It is time." "Elena," Patricia said, not looking at her daughter's face, but scanning the dress for wrinkles. "The car is waiting downstairs. The press is already in a frenzy. This is the moment we have worked for. Do not look so pale. Pinch your cheeks." Elena lowered her hand. "I am not sure I can do this." "Mother," she said, her voice quiet. Patricia stopped. She turned slowly, her expression hardening into the look she usually reserved for incompetent staffers. "We are not having this conversation again," Patricia said, her tone sharp enough to cut glass. "You are securing your future. You are securing this family's legacy. Charles is going to be president one day. Do you understand what that means? It means you stop shaking and you smile." It was the same refrain Elena had heard her entire life. Smile, wave, ignore the rumors, ignore the late nights Charles spent away. Ignore the way his eyes went dead when the cameras stopped rolling. She had been groomed for this role, polished like a trophy until she reflected only what others wanted to see. The door to the suite opened again, and the air in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Charles Mercer walked in. He was undeniably handsome in his tuxedo, his silver-streaked hair perfectly coiffed, his jawline strong. He carried himself with the easy arrogance of a man who owned the room and everyone in it. "Leave us, Patricia," Charles said. Her mother did not hesitate. She gave Elena one last warning look and swept out the door, closing it softly behind her. Elena stood rooted to the spot as Charles approached. He did not smile. There were no cameras here, no voters to charm. There was only the property he was about to acquire. "You look acceptable," Charles said, his eyes raking over her with critical assessment rather than affection. "The necklace sits well. Thank you." "Charles," Elena said, the automatic response rising to her lips. He stepped closer, invading her personal space until she could smell his expensive cologne, a scent that used to smell like success but now smelled like a cage. He reached out and took her hand. It should have been a romantic gesture, but his grip was wrong. It was too tight. His fingers dug into the delicate bones of her wrist, grinding them together. Elena flinched and tried to pull back, but he held fast. "You have been quiet today, Elena," he said, his voice low and smooth, like oil slicking over deep water. "I hope you are not having second thoughts. That would be very embarrassing for me, and you know how much I detest embarrassment. "I am just nervous," Elena managed to say, her heart hammering against her ribs. Charles squeezed harder. A sharp bolt of pain shot up her arm. "Nervousness is for amateurs," he whispered, leaning down so his lips brushed her ear. "You are a Mercer now, or you will be in an hour. Remember everything your family owes me. Elena, your father's debts, your mother's career. I bought and paid for this life of yours. You would do well to remember that obedience is the highest virtue a wife can possess." He pulled back and looked at her face. Tears pricked the corners of her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. He released her wrist abruptly. "Fix your face," he commanded, adjusting his cufflinks. "You will learn your place once the cameras are gone." He turned and walked out, leaving Elena gasping for air. She looked down at her wrist. Distinct red marks were already blooming against her pale skin, the imprint of his fingers visible. A knock at the door signaled the makeup artist's return. The woman entered, chirping about lipstick shades, then stopped when she saw Elena rubbing her wrist. "Oh dear," the woman said, her eyes widening slightly. "Did you bump into something?" Elena looked at the red marks, then at the makeup artist. She forced the smile onto her face, the one she had practiced since childhood. "Yes." Elena lied. "I am just clumsy. Please cover it up." The ceremony was a blur of flashing lights and suffocating perfume. The historic mansion had been transformed into a political theater. Hundreds of guests sat in rows, their faces a sea of expectation. As Elena walked down the aisle, the organ music swelling around her, she felt like she was marching toward a guillotine. She saw the faces of the guests. They were not looking at a person. They were looking at a symbol. They saw the governor's bride. They saw a polling point. They saw a merger. Charles waited at the altar, the perfect picture of the loving groom. As she reached him, he took her hand, the one he had bruised only an hour ago, and kissed it gently. The crowd sighed in collective adoration. Elena felt the phantom pressure of his grip and had to lock her knees to keep from trembling. She spoke her vows in a voice that sounded hollow to her own ears. She promised to love, honor, and obey. The word obedience stuck in her throat like a shard of glass. Then it was over. The kiss was performed for the angles, perfect for the front page. The reception was a marathon of handshakes and hollow laughter. Powerful men whispered deals in corners while clutching champagne flutes. Elena stood by Charles's side, a mannequin in white, accepting compliments she did not hear. By the time they were whisked away to the hotel where they would spend their wedding night, Elena was exhausted in a way that went beyond the physical. It was a soul-deep weariness, a numbness that was slowly giving way to a cold, hard stone of dread in her stomach. The penthouse suite was an entire floor of the city's most exclusive hotel. It was opulent, filled with white roses and chilled champagne, but the luxury could not mask the security detail stationed at the elevator banks. Holt, Charles's head of security, a man with a neck as thick as a tree trunk and eyes that missed nothing, escorted them to the door. "The floor is locked down for safety. Mrs. Mercer," Holt said. His voice was flat, professional, and devoid of warmth. "No one comes up or down without clearance. We have men at every exit. You can rest easy." It did not sound like reassurance. It sounded like the warden reading the rules of the prison yard. "Thank you," Holt, Charles said, dismissing him. They entered the suite. The heavy double doors clicked shut, and the silence returned, heavier than before. Charles loosened his tie, his demeanor shifting instantly. The charm evaporated. He looked annoyed, as if the performance had drained him and he resented her for still being there. "I need a drink," Charles muttered, walking toward the bar. "And I have to take a call. Do not wait up for me." He poured himself a glass of scotch and walked into the adjoining private study, leaving the door slightly ajar. Elena stood in the center of the living room. Her feet ached, her head pounded. She looked at the bedroom door, dreading the moment he would expect her to walk through it. She needed water. She walked softly toward the small kitchenette near the study, her bare feet silent on the plush carpet. As she passed the crack in the study door, Charles's voice drifted out. It was not the smooth baritone he used for speeches. It was jagged, cruel, and terrifyingly casual. "I do not care how you do it." "Holt," Charles was saying, "just make the problem go away. That journalist is getting too close to the Cayman accounts." There was a pause as he listened to the person on the other line. "No," Charles snapped. "Scaring him is not enough. He has the files. If those get out, the Election Commission will be the least of my problems. I want him handled tonight. Make it look like an accident. A fatal overdose would be convenient. He has a history of partying, does he not? Use that." Elena froze. The glass of water she had been reaching for remained on the counter. Her blood turned to ice. Fatal overdose. She pressed a hand over her mouth to stifle the gasp that threatened to escape. This was not political maneuvering. This was not strong-arming donors. This was murder. Lives are disposable. "Holt," Charles continued, his voice dropping to a chilling murmur. "Anyone who stands in the way of this administration is disposable. Do not call me back until it is done." The sound of the phone being slammed down echoed like a gunshot. Elena backed away, her heart thundering against her ribs like a trapped bird. The rumors, the whispers she had ignored for years, the convenient disappearances of rivals, the way her father looked terrified whenever Charles's name was mentioned. It was all true, all of it. She was not just married to a controlling politician. She was married to a monster. She was halfway across the living room when the study door swung fully open. Charles stood there, his tie undone, his eyes cold and hard. He looked at her, and for a second she thought he knew. She thought he had seen her listening, but he just frowned at her dress. "Why are you still in that thing?" he asked, his voice thick with irritation. Elena struggled to find her voice. She clasped her hands together to hide the shaking. "I was just getting some water," she said. Charles sighed and walked toward her. The space between them seemed to shrink, the air growing thin. He stopped in front of her, his gaze heavy. "You are my wife now." "Elena," he said, "stop acting like a frightened child. It is unbecoming." He reached out, placing his hands on her bare shoulders. He smoothed his palms down her arms, a gesture that should have been tender, but his skin felt dry and hot, and the weight of his hands felt like chains settling over her flesh. His touch was possession. It was a claim of ownership over an object he had purchased. Elena's stomach twisted violently. She forced herself not to recoil, knowing that any sign of resistance would only make it worse. "I have one more call to take," Charles said, his hands lingering on her waist. "Go to the bedroom, take off the dress. I will be there in 5 minutes. Do not make me wait." He turned and walked back toward the study, assuming total compliance. He did not even look back. He was so arrogant, so certain of his control over her, that he didn't even consider she might have a will of her own. Elena watched the study door close again. 5 minutes. The fear that had paralyzed her suddenly cracked, and something else surged through the fissure. Survival. She could not stay here. If she stayed, she would die. Maybe not tonight, maybe not tomorrow, but the Elena Ward who had existed was already dying. If she walked into that bedroom, she would never walk out again. She would become an accessory to his crimes, a prisoner in his gilded cage, until the day she became inconvenient. She looked down at her wedding dress. It was heavy, restrictive. She moved. It was not a conscious decision, it was pure animal instinct. She kicked off her satin heels, leaving them abandoned on the Persian rug. She ran to the small closet in the entryway where her personal items had been stashed earlier. Buried at the bottom of her garment bag was a small, unassuming duffel bag. She had packed it 3 days ago in a trance, a subconscious act of rebellion she hadn't understood until this exact second. It held a change of clothes, a pair of comfortable sneakers, and $200 in cash. She grabbed the bag. She looked at the main door. No, Holt's men were there. The elevator required a key card she did not have. Her eyes darted to the service corridor near the kitchenette. She had seen the catering staff coming in and out of it earlier when they brought the champagne. It led to the service elevators and the back stairwell. Elena gathered the skirt of her massive gown in her arms, bunching the expensive silk to free her legs. She ran. She slipped through the service door just as she heard Charles's voice booming from the study again. The hallway beyond was stark. concrete and fluorescent lights, a jarring contrast to the plush suite. She did not wait for the elevator. That would be too slow. She pushed open the heavy door to the stairwell and began to descend. The stairs were cold concrete. Her bare feet slapped against the stone, the sound echoing in the narrow shaft. She was on the penthouse level. She had 20 floors to go. She moved as fast as she could, the adrenaline masking the pain in her feet. Flight. She had to fly. By the 10th floor, her lungs were burning. By the 5th floor, she heard the distant sound of shouting from above. They knew. Panic surged, giving her a fresh burst of energy. She practically threw herself down the remaining flights, stumbling out of the stairwell and into the loading dock at the rear of the hotel. 2 kitchen staff members in white aprons looked up, startled, as a woman in a disheveled couture wedding gown, holding a duffel bag and barefoot, burst through the doors. "Hey," one of them started, "you cannot be back here." Elena did not stop. She pushed past them, the cool night air hitting her face like a physical blow. She burst out into the alleyway. It was raining. Of course it was raining. The sky was weeping over the city, a cold, relentless downpour that soaked her dress in seconds, turning the silk heavy and gray. She did not look back. She ran toward the street, the wet pavement slick under her feet. She turned a corner, putting the hotel behind her, and kept running. She did not know where she was going. She only knew what she was running from. Behind her, in the penthouse suite, the door to the bedroom was kicked open. Charles stood in the empty room. He saw the discarded shoes. He saw the open service door. His face turned a shade of purple that would have terrified his voters. He pulled out his phone and dialed Holt. "She is gone," Charles snarled, his voice shaking with a rage that bordered on madness. "Gone?" Holt's voice crackled in his ear. She took the service stairs. Charles shouted, "Find her. Holt, close the perimeter. I do not care who you have to bribe or who you have to hurt. Turn this city upside down." He walked to the window, looking down at the rain-slicked streets of the city he claimed to own. "No one runs from me," Charles whispered to the glass. "Find her," he barked into the phone. "And when you do, bring her back to me." The hunt had begun. Elena ran blindly, the city blurring into streaks of neon and shadow. She was cold, she was alone, and she was being hunted by the most powerful man in the state. She turned down an unfamiliar street, the buildings getting darker, the storefronts boarded up. She was leaving the safety of the wealthy district and entering a world she knew nothing about. But she kept running, clutching her small bag to her chest, disappearing into the dark, wet throat of the city. The rain in the city was not like the rain in the suburbs where Elena had grown up. It was not a gentle cleansing. It was an assault. It smelled of gasoline and wet concrete, and it fell with a heaviness that soaked through the stolen wool coat Elena had snatched from an unattended rack outside a dive bar 3 blocks back. Underneath the scratchy, oversized gray coat, her couture wedding gown was a ruined wreck. The hem, once pristine silk, was now heavy with mud and oil, dragging behind her like a shackle. She had torn the train off 2 miles ago, leaving a jagged edge of lace that slapped against her calves with every step. Elena Ward, the woman whose face was currently splashed across every television screen and newsfeed in the state, shivered violently as she turned a corner into a district that had clearly never seen a campaign bus. The streetlights here were yellow and buzzing, half of them burnt out. The buildings were brick skeletons, their windows barred. She clutched her small duffel bag to her chest, her knuckles white. She had a phone in there, a sleek device paid for by the campaign, but she dared not turn it on. Charles had tracking software on everything. If she powered it up, Holt would have her location within 30 seconds. Her credit cards were equally useless. One swipe, and she would be flagging her position to the hunting dogs Charles had unleashed. She was a ghost in the machine, a wealthy, educated ghost with $200 in cash and nowhere to go. She walked faster, her bare feet aching in the cheap canvas sneakers she had pulled from her bag. She needed to get off the street. She needed a plan, but every time she stopped to think, she saw Charles's eyes, cold, possessive, murderous. She heard his voice ordering a fatal overdose for a human being as if he were ordering lunch. Elena ducked into an alleyway, seeking shelter from the biting wind. The alley ran alongside a building that throbbed with low, heavy bass. A neon sign above the street flickered with the words, "The Obsidian." It looked like a nightclub, the kind that did not ask for identification if you had enough cash. She leaned against the damp brick wall, trying to catch her breath. Her chest burned. "Hey, look at this." The voice was rough, scraping against the humid air. Elena froze. She turned to see 3 men emerging from the shadows near the dumpster. They were dressed in dark hoodies and denim, their postures loose with the kind of confidence that came from knowing no police cars patrolled this block. One of them, a man with a shaved head and a scar running through his eyebrow, was holding a smartphone. The screen cast a pale blue light on his face. He looked at the phone, then at Elena, then back at the phone. "I tell you, that is her," the man said, grinning, "the runaway bride." Elena stepped back, her hand tightening on her bag. "I do not know what you're talking about," she said, her voice shaking despite her best effort to sound authoritative. "Do not play dumb, sweetheart," the second man said, stepping closer. He was thinner, with nervous eyes. The alert just popped up. "Governor Mercer is offering $50,000 for information leading to your safe return." 50 grand, the third man laughed, a low, ugly sound. "Or maybe we do not call the governor just yet. Maybe a girl like this, all dressed up in fancy white lace. Maybe she is worth more than a reward check." Fear, cold and sharp, spiked in Elena's gut. She looked toward the street, but the shaved-headed man moved to block her path. "Get out of my way," Elena commanded, channeling the tone her mother used on interns. "Or what?" the leader sneered. "You going to call your husband? He looks pretty mad on the news. I bet he would pay double to get you back before morning. Or maybe we just keep you for a while." He reached out, his fingers brushing the lapel of her stolen coat. Elena slapped his hand away. "Do not touch me." The man's face darkened. He grabbed her arm, the same arm Charles had bruised hours earlier. Pain flared, hot and familiar. "You are feisty for a rich girl?" He spat, yanking her forward. Elena screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the thumping bass from the club next door. She kicked out, her sneaker connecting with his shin, but he barely flinched. The other 2 men closed in, their intentions clear and terrifying. Suddenly, a wash of bright white light flooded the alley. Tires screeched on the wet asphalt, a sharp, aggressive sound that made the men jump. A sleek black sedan, polished to a mirror shine despite the weather, had pulled up to the mouth of the alley, blocking the exit. The doors opened. 2 men in dark suits stepped out from the passenger side in the rear left, moving with military precision. But it was the man who emerged from the rear right door who sucked the oxygen out of the air. He was tall, wearing a charcoal suit that fit his broad shoulders as if it had been sculpted on him. He did not run from the rain. He walked through it as if it did not dare to touch him. His hair was dark, slicked back from a face that was strikingly handsome, but hard, like a statue carved from granite. Adrian Costa. He did not shout and he did not run. He simply walked into the alley, his hands resting casually in his trouser pockets. "Gentlemen," Adrian said. His voice was a rich baritone, smooth and deceptively calm. It carried effortlessly over the rain. "I believe you are blocking my driveway." The leader of the thugs still had his hand on Elena's arm, though his grip had loosened slightly. "This is none of your business, Costa," the thug said, though his voice wavered. "We found something. We are claiming the reward." Adrian stopped 5 feet away. He looked at the thug's hand on Elena's arm, then up to the man's eyes. His gaze was terrifyingly empty of emotion. It was the look of a predator who had already decided how he would dismantle his prey. "You are touching a woman who is clearly distressed," Adrian said softly, "and you are doing it on my property. That makes it my business." The 2 men flanking Adrian shifted. They did not draw weapons, but the way they stood, hands ready, weight balanced, made it clear they were lethal. Elena saw Adrian's hand shift slightly in his pocket, the outline of something heavy pressed against the fabric of his suit pants. A gun. "Let her go," Adrian said. "I will not ask twice." The air in the alley seemed to vibrate with tension. The thug looked at Adrian, then at Adrian's men, and finally at Elena. The promise of $50,000 was heavy, but the promise of immediate violence from the city's most feared crime lord was heavier. He released Elena, shoving her slightly as he stepped back. "She's not worth the trouble," the thug muttered. "Smart choice," Adrian said. "Now run. Before I change my mind about letting you leave." The three men did not hesitate. They scrambled past the black car, disappearing into the rainy night like rats fleeing a rising tide. Elena stood alone in the center of the alley, clutching her coat, her chest heaving. She was trembling so hard her teeth chattered. Adrian turned his gaze to her. Up close, his eyes were the color of espresso, dark and intense. He swept his gaze over her, from the muddy hem of the wedding dress peeking out from the coat to her wet hair and pale, frightened face. He recognized her instantly. The headlines had been unavoidable all evening. Governor's bride vanishes. Foul play suspected. But looking at the fire in her eyes, Adrian suspected the only foul play was whatever she was running from. "You are Elena Ward," he stated. It was not a question. Elena lifted her chin. She was terrified, soaked and cornered, but she refused to cower. "And you are Adrian Costa," she replied. She knew the name. Everyone in the city knew the name. The police called him a racketeer. The papers called him a businessman with shadowy ties. Charles called him a cancer. Adrian's mouth quirked at the corner, a faint, almost invisible smile. "I see my reputation precedes me," he said. "You should not be out here, Miss Ward. This neighborhood eats people like you alive by sunrise." "I am handling it," Elena said, though her voice cracked on the last word. "You were about to be bartered like a used car," Adrian corrected her, his tone dry. "You need to get off the street." He gestured toward the open door of his car. The interior looked warm, lined with cream leather. "Get in." Elena did not move. She took a step back, pressing herself against the wet brick wall. "No," she said firmly. Adrian paused, his eyebrows lifting slightly. "Excuse me? I am not getting into a car with a strange man," Elena said, her eyes darting between him and his guards. "I may be desperate, Mr. Costa, but I am not stupid. I know who you are. I know what you do." Adrian studied her. Most people, when faced with him, either fawned or trembled. She was doing plenty of trembling, but the defiance in her jaw was made of steel. He liked it. "If I wanted to hurt you," Adrian said, stepping a little closer, lowering his voice so only she could hear, "I would have let those men drag you off, or I would have put you in the trunk. I am offering you a seat. I cannot go back," Elena whispered, the fight draining out of her for a second. "If you take me to the police, they will take me to him. Him, the governor." Adrian caught the inflection. He heard the genuine terror in her voice when she referenced her husband. He knew Charles Mercer well, not personally, but he knew the type of man he was. A man who smiled while he cut your throat. "I have no love for the police," Adrian said, "and I have even less for your fiancé." "Husband," Elena corrected bitterly. "Unfortunately." Adrian looked at the rain soaking into her coat. "I am making you a one-time offer." "Elena," he said, "I have a secure location nearby. Warm, dry, safe, no police, no husband. You get in the car, and I give you shelter." "And what do you want in return?" Elena asked, her eyes narrowing. "Men like you never do anything for free." Adrian's expression turned serious. "I want the truth," he said. "I want to know why a woman who has everything runs away on her wedding night looking like she has seen a ghost." Elena hesitated. She looked at the dark street where the thugs had gone. She looked at the warm car. She looked at Adrian's face, searching for deceit. She saw danger. Yes. But she did not see the cruelty she saw in Charles. "Fine," she whispered. She walked toward the car. Adrian did not touch her. He simply opened the door wider and waited until she was settled inside before closing it with a solid thud. The drive was short, but the silence inside the vehicle was heavy enough to crush a lung. Elena sat rigidly on the edge of the leather seat, gripping her bag as if it contained the nuclear codes. The heat in the car was blasting, but she could not stop shivering. She watched Adrian in the reflection of the window. He was looking out at the passing city, his profile sharp against the blurring lights. He seemed lost in thought, his hand resting on his chin. Occasionally, their eyes met in the dark glass. Hers were wide, hunting for an exit. His were narrowed, calculating. He was putting the pieces together. The daughter of the political elite, running from the golden boy of the polls. There was a story here that could destroy careers or end lives. Adrian knew Charles Mercer was dirty. He had known it for years, but he had never had proof. Now, the proof was shivering in his back seat, dripping rainwater onto his custom upholstery. "We are here," the driver announced. The car pulled into an underground garage that smelled of concrete and expensive wax. This was the back entrance to the Obsidian, the club Elena had seen from the alley. Adrian got out and opened her door. "Follow me," he said. "Keep your head down." He led her through a labyrinth of service corridors, bypassing the throbbing heart of the club. They moved past kitchens and security checkpoints where large men nodded deferentially to Adrian. Elena felt like Alice falling down a very dangerous rabbit hole. They took a private elevator up 3 floors. When the doors opened, the noise of the club was gone, replaced by the hush of thick carpets and soundproofed walls. "This is my private office," Adrian said, unlocking a heavy mahogany door. The room was expansive, dimly lit by amber sconces. One wall was entirely glass, overlooking the dance floor below. From here, the people dancing looked like ants, oblivious to the drama unfolding above their heads. The room smelled of old paper, leather, and cedar. Elena stepped inside, feeling absurdly out of place. She was a ruin in a palace. Mud was dripping from her hem onto the pristine rug. Adrian closed the door and locked it. The sound of the deadbolt sliding home made Elena flinch. Adrian noticed. "It is to keep people out, Elena," he said softly, "not to keep you in." He walked to a side cabinet and pulled out a thick white towel and a bottle of water. He handed them to her. "Drink," he ordered gently. "You are shaking." Elena took the water and drained half of it in one gulp. She wrapped the towel around her shoulders, huddling into it. "Thank you," she mumbled. "There is a bathroom through there," Adrian said, pointing to a door on the left. "There is a shower if you want it, and in that wardrobe." He pointed to a tall armoire. "I keep spare clothes for guests, shirts, robes. Pick whatever you want. Get out of that wet dress before you catch pneumonia." Elena nodded and retreated into the bathroom. It was marble and gold, more luxurious than her apartment. She set her bag down and looked at herself in the mirror. Her mascara had run, creating dark streaks down her cheeks. She looked like a survivor of a shipwreck. She reached behind her to unzip the dress. Her fingers were frozen, stiff and clumsy from the cold. The zipper was delicate, hidden in the lace, and it was stuck. She tugged at it, panic rising in her throat. She just wanted it off. She wanted the weight of the Mercer money and the Mercer name off her body. She pulled harder. The fabric tore slightly, but the zipper would not budge. A sob of frustration escaped her lips. There was a knock on the door frame. The door was slightly ajar. "Elena?" Adrian's voice was low. "Is everything all right? I cannot get it," she stammered, tears of exhaustion springing to her eyes. "It is stuck." There was a pause. "Do you want me to help?" Adrian asked. "I will not look. I just want to help you get free of it." Elena took a deep breath. She had no choice. "Yes," she whispered. "Please." Adrian stepped into the bathroom. He kept his eyes fixed on the back of her head, respecting her privacy. He moved behind her, his presence warm and large. "May I?" he asked. "Yes." He reached out. His fingers were warm against her cold skin. He did not touch her back, only the fabric. He was careful, deliberate. He found the snag in the lace where the zipper had caught. With the patience of a safecracker, he worked the fabric loose. "Hold still," he murmured. He tugged gently, and the zipper gave way, sliding down her spine with a soft hiss. The bodice loosened, and Elena let out a breath she felt she had been holding for 10 years. As the dress fell open, the sleeve slipped down her arm. Adrian froze. His eyes were drawn to her wrist. The makeup artist's work had washed away in the rain. The bruises Charles had left were vivid now, dark purple fingerprints stark against her pale skin. The air in the bathroom changed instantly. The temperature seemed to drop. Adrian reached out, and this time, he did touch her. He took her hand, lifting it gently to inspect the marks. His grip was the opposite of Charles's, feather-light, terrified of causing her pain. "Who did this?" Adrian asked. His voice was a low growl, vibrating with a quiet, terrifying rage. Elena did not pull away. She looked at his hand holding hers. "He did," she whispered. "Before the ceremony," he said. "He said I had to learn obedience." Adrian's jaw clenched so hard a muscle feathered in his cheek. He looked at the bruise, then met her eyes in the mirror. His dark eyes were not cold anymore. They were burning with a fierce, protective intensity that stole Elena's breath. He let out a sharp breath through his nose. "You do not owe any man your obedience." "Elena," he said, his voice rough. "And you certainly do not owe him your body or your pain." He released her hand slowly, stepping back to give her space. "I will be in the office," he said, his voice tight. "Take your time." He walked out, closing the door behind him. Elena stood there, her heart pounding a new rhythm. For the first time all night, the shaking stopped. She stripped off the heavy dress and left it in a heap on the floor. 30 minutes later, Elena emerged. She was wearing a white silk slip she had found in the wardrobe and a plush charcoal robe that was clearly Adrian's. It swallowed her frame. The sleeves rolled up 3 times. She smelled of soap and his cologne, sandalwood and expensive tobacco. Adrian was sitting at his desk, a glass of amber liquid in his hand. He stood when she entered. "Better?" he asked. "Much," Elena said. She felt vulnerable in the robe, yet oddly safe. The door was locked. The man with the gun was on her side. She sat in the leather chair opposite his desk. Adrian poured her a glass of the amber liquid. "Brandy," he said. "It helps with the shock." Elena took a sip. It burned pleasantly, warming her from the inside out. "So," Adrian said, leaning back in his chair, his eyes fixed on hers. "The truth. Why did you run?" Elena looked into her glass. She thought about the lies she had told for years. She thought about the perfect couple the world saw. Then she looked at Adrian. She saw the scar on his knuckle. She saw the way he watched the door, always alert. He was a criminal, yes, but he lived by a code. Charles had no code. "I overheard him," Elena began. Her voice was steady now. In the suite, he was on the phone with his head of security. Adrian nodded for her to continue. "He ordered a hit," she said. "The words tasting like ash. A journalist. He said to make it look like a fatal overdose. He said lives are disposable." Adrian went very still. "Which journalist? I do not know the name," Elena said. "But he mentioned campaign finance." "And the Cayman accounts." Adrian's eyes widened slightly. He set his glass down. "And the witness?" Adrian asked. He said to arrange an accident," Elena continued, tears welling up again. "He talked about killing people like he was ordering room service. I realized everything I had heard, everything I tried to ignore. It was all true. He is a monster." Adrian stood up and walked to the window, looking down at the dance floor. His mind was racing. Charles Mercer, the man who had campaigned on a platform of law and order, the man who had pledged to clean up the city, the man who, 10 years ago, had been the prosecutor who buried evidence that could have exonerated Adrian's father. Adrian's father had died in prison because of Charles Mercer's ambition. Adrian had spent a decade building his empire in the shadows, waiting for a weakness, a crack in the armor of the man who had destroyed his family. He turned back to Elena. She looked small in the big chair, but her eyes were fierce. She was not just a victim, she was a witness. She was the only person on earth who had seen the monster behind the mask and lived to tell the tale. "He hurt you?" Adrian asked, gesturing to her wrist. "Yes," Elena said. "And he would have done worse if I had stayed." Adrian walked back to the desk. He placed his hands on the mahogany surface, leaning toward her. "You're safe here, Elena," he said. "I give you my word. As long as you are under my roof, he cannot touch you." "Why?" Elena asked. "Why would you risk this for me?" Adrian looked at the bruise on her wrist again, then up to her eyes. "Because Charles Mercer took my father from me," Adrian said, his voice cold as the grave. "He destroyed my family to build his career. I have been waiting a long time for a weapon to use against him." He looked at Elena, his expression softening just a fraction. "And then you walked into my alley." Elena stared at him. The connection snapped into place. They were two broken pieces of the same puzzle. "I can help you," Elena whispered. "I know his schedule. I know his donors. I know where he keeps his private files." Adrian extended his hand across the desk. It was a business offer, but it felt like a pact. "Then let us burn his kingdom to the ground," Adrian said, "together." Elena reached out. Her hand was small in his, but her grip was firm. "Together," she said. "Outside." The rain continued to pour, washing away the old Elena ward. Inside, under the dim lights of the Mafia boss's office, a new alliance was forged in blood and secrets. The governor had started a war he did not know he was fighting, and he had just handed the enemy the keys to his destruction. The neon pulse of the nightclub was left far behind, replaced by the quiet, rain-slicked streets of a neighborhood that sat on the border between gentrification and decay. Adrian Costa drove the black sedan himself this time, his knuckles steady on the leather wheel, while his men followed in a trailing vehicle. Elena watched the city blur past, the adrenaline of her escape beginning to curdle into a heavy, bone-deep exhaustion. They pulled up to a brick building that housed a commercial bakery on the ground floor. The air smelled faintly of yeast and burnt sugar, a sharp contrast to the antiseptic floral scent of the hotel suite she had fled. Adrian ushered her through a side door and up 2 flights of narrow stairs. "This is not a palace." "Elena," Adrian said as he unlocked the steel reinforced door at the landing, "but it is off the books. No digital paper trail. No property records linked to me or the organization." He pushed the door open, revealing a renovated loft apartment. It was sparse but clean, with exposed brick walls and large windows covered by heavy blackout curtains. Adrian turned to her, his expression shifting from that of a rescuer to a jailer, though his eyes lacked the cruelty she was used to. "Here are the rules," he said, his voice low and firm. "No phone calls, no internet access. We cannot risk a signal ping. You do not open this door for anyone, not even if they say they are police. My men will be stationed in the hall and the alley 24 hours a day. If you need something, you tell me." Elena wrapped her arms around herself, the reality of her situation settling in. She had traded a golden cage for a brick one. "I understand," she said quietly. Adrian watched her for a moment, seeing the fatigue etched into the lines of her face. His hard expression softened. "Just a fraction." "You are under my protection now," he said. The tone was unexpectedly gentle, a velvet covering over steel. "You sleep, you eat, you recover. No one touches you here." He left her then, retreating to the second bedroom that served as his makeshift office, leaving Elena standing in the silence of a life she had never planned for. When Elena woke the next morning, she did not hear the hushed whispers of campaign aides or the rustle of briefing papers. She heard the distant wail of a siren and the rhythmic thrum of traffic. She blinked at the ceiling, momentarily disoriented by the warmth of the duvet and the absence of dread. She climbed out of bed, still wearing the oversized t-shirt Adrian had left for her. The apartment was filled with the rich, dark aroma of coffee. She wandered into the small kitchen, her bare feet silent on the hardwood floor. Adrian was there, standing by the stove with a French press. He looked different in the morning light. The intimidating suit was gone, replaced by dark jeans and a white t-shirt. He had rolled the sleeves up, revealing forearms corded with muscle and covered in intricate black ink. Elena stared. She had never seen a man in her world look so undone. Charles was always polished, always armored in expensive fabrics. Adrian looked raw, real, and dangerously human. A complex geometric pattern wound around his left wrist, disappearing up his arm, a permanent mark of a life she knew nothing about. "Good morning," Adrian said without turning around, as if he had sensed her presence. "Good morning," Elena replied, her voice husky with sleep. He turned, holding out a mug, black. "No sugar. I assumed you needed the caffeine more than the sweetness. Elena took the mug, her fingers brushing his. His skin was warm. You would be right, she said, in taking a sip. It was strong, bitter, and perfect. She looked around the kitchen, feeling useless. Do you need help? Adrian leaned against the counter, crossing his arms over his chest. His gaze was amused. Can you cook? Elena? Elena opened her mouth to say yes, then closed it. She thought about the chefs at the governor's mansion. She thought about the catering staff at her parents' estate. I can make toast, she admitted, a flush rising to her cheeks. And I can order a very specific salad. Adrian laughed. It was a low, rumbling sound that seemed to vibrate in the small space. It startled her. She realized she had never heard a man laugh in her presence without it being a performance for an audience. Toast it is. Then, Adrian said, I will handle the eggs. Over the next few days, the apartment became a strange, suspended reality. The fear of Charles was still there, a dark cloud on the horizon. But inside the loft, life developed a rhythm. They shared meals at the small wooden table. At first, the silence was thick with awkwardness. Elena ate with the perfect posture of a debutante, while Adrian ate with the efficiency of a man who often did not have time for lunch. But slowly, the tension began to unravel. One evening, Adrian decided to make a pasta sauce from scratch. He insisted Elena help, placing a knife and a cutting board in front of her. It is an onion, Elena, Adrian said, watching her stare at the vegetable. It will not bite you. I know what it is, Elena retorted, picking up the knife. I usually have people for this. She made a tentative slice, the knife slipping dangerously on the onion's skin. Adrian moved instantly. Stop, he said. You're going to lose a finger. He moved behind her, reaching around to cover her hands with his. His chest pressed lightly against her back, a wall of solid heat. He adjusted her grip on the handle. Like this, he instructed, his voice right by her ear. Tuck your fingers. Let the blade do the work. Do not force it. He guided her hand through the motion. The knife sliced cleanly through the onion. Elena stopped breathing. She was suddenly hyper-aware of him, the scent of soap and basil on his skin, the roughness of his palms, the strength in his arms caging her against the counter. They stood there for a beat too long. The air in the kitchen tightened, charged with a sudden electric current. Elena turned her head slightly. Adrian was looking down at her, his eyes dark and unreadable. His hands were still covering hers on the knife handle. I think I have it now, she whispered, though her pulse was hammering in her throat. Adrian cleared his throat and stepped back abruptly, the loss of his warmth leaving a chill on her back. Right, he said, turning back to the stove to stir the sauce. Keep chopping. The domesticity was a facade. However, Adrian never let her forget why she was there. One rainy afternoon, he pushed the coffee table against the wall and cleared the center of the living room. You are smart, Elena, Adrian said, rolling up his sleeves, and you are brave. But physically, Charles has the advantage. If he or his men get their hands on you again, you need to know how to buy yourself 3 seconds. 3 seconds? Elena asked, feeling foolish in her yoga pants. 3 seconds is the difference between escape and a closed casket, Adrian said bluntly. He taught her how to break a wrist grip first, then he moved to holds. Grab me, he ordered. Elena hesitated, then grabbed his arm. He twisted out of it effortlessly. Now, I grab you, he said. He stepped in close. He wrapped his arms around her waist, pinning her arms to her sides. It was a simulation of an attack, but the proximity was overwhelming. She could feel the hard planes of his chest, the steady rhythm of his heart. Drop your weight, Adrian commanded. Stomp the instep. Drive your elbow back. Elena tried, but she was stiff, afraid of hurting him. Harder. Elena, Adrian barked. He's not going to be gentle. Neither am I. Do it. Elena gritted her teeth. She slammed her heel down near his foot and shoved her hips back. It threw him off balance slightly. Better. He grunted again. They worked for an hour until sweat stuck Elena's hair to her neck. Her muscles burned, but she felt a strange surge of power. She was not just a doll anymore. She was a weapon in the making. For the final move, Adrian demonstrated a pin against the wall. He shoved her backward, controlled, but forceful. Her back hit the plaster. His hands slammed onto the wall on either side of her head, boxing her in, his body pressed against hers, hip to hip, chest to chest. Now, he breathed, his face inches from hers. How do you get out? Elena looked up at him. His eyes were dilated, intense. Her heart was racing, slamming against her ribs like a trapped bird, but it was not fear. It was something else. It was the heat of his body, the scent of him, the raw masculinity that overwhelmed her senses. She forgot the move. She forgot Charles. She forgot everything except the man standing in front of her. The silence stretched, heavy and thick. Adrian's gaze dropped to her lips. His breathing was ragged. Elena's hands, which should have been fighting him, had somehow found their way to his biceps, gripping the muscle there. She saw the conflict in his eyes, the desire warring with the code he lived by. "Adrian," she whispered. The sound of her voice seemed to snap a cord. Adrian blinked, and the mask slammed back down. He pushed himself off the wall, stepping back 3 feet in a single motion. "I need water," he muttered, not looking at her. "That is enough for today. Remember the leverage." He walked into the kitchen, leaving Elena leaning against the wall, her legs trembling. As the days turned into a week, the conversations between them grew deeper. Late at night, with the city lights casting long shadows across the apartment floor, Adrian spoke of his world. He did not sugarcoat it. He told her about the illegal gambling, the smuggling, the violence that was a currency in his line of work. But he also told her about the legitimate businesses, the construction firms that employed half the neighborhood, the logistics companies. And he told her about his father. "My father ran a shipping company," Adrian said one night, swirling a glass of bourbon. It was clean, and he was a good man. But he refused to let Charles Mercer use his containers for off-the-books imports during his first campaign for district attorney. Elena sat quietly on the sofa, listening. "So Charles fabricated a scandal," Adrian continued, his voice void of emotion, which made it all the more terrifying. "He planted evidence. Fraud. Embezzlement. My father went to prison for 10 years. He died inside after 2. Charles built his reputation as a corruption buster on my father's grave." Elena felt a chill run through her. She had known Charles was ambitious. She had not known he was a destroyer of worlds. "He made us both orphans in a way," Elena said softly. "He took your father, and he took my life, molded it until I did not recognize myself." Adrian looked at her, his dark eyes filled with a shared, tragic understanding. "He shaped us." Adrian agreed, "but he will not define how we end." The fragile piece of the apartment was shattered the following evening. Elena was reading a book on the sofa while the news played quietly on the television. Suddenly, the anchor's voice changed, becoming grave. "Breaking news tonight on the disappearance of Elena Ward." Elena's head snapped up. The screen showed Charles. He was standing at a podium, looking haggard and devastated. He wiped a tear from his eye. "My wife has been taken," Charles said, his voice breaking perfectly on cue. "We believe she was coerced. She is a fragile woman, and she needs her medication. To whoever has her, please, just let her come home." Elena stood up, the book falling from her lap. "He is lying," she gasped. "I do not take medication. He's trying to make me look unstable." The screen flashed a picture of Elena from the wedding, looking pale and terrified. "We are offering a $100,000 reward," Charles continued. "Help us bring our girl home." The manipulation was masterfully cruel. He was painting her as a mental patient and a victim, ensuring that if she tried to speak out, no one would believe her. He was isolating her in plain sight. Tears of frustration and rage burned Elena's eyes. She felt the walls closing in. He was going to win. He always won. "Turn it off," she whispered. Adrian was already there. He picked up the remote and killed the screen, plunging the room into silence. He stood before her, blocking the blank television. "Do not listen to him," Adrian said. "He's winning." "Adrian," Elena sobbed, the dam finally breaking. "Look at him. Everyone believes him. I am just the runaway bride. I am the crazy woman. I should have just stayed. I have destroyed my family's reputation. I have put you in danger. I'm so sorry." She covered her face with her hands, her shoulders shaking with the force of her weeping. The shame she had been carrying, the shame of being weak, of being used, of running away, came pouring out. "Ellen?" Adrian stepped close. He did not hesitate this time. He reached out and pulled her into his arms. It was not the possessive grip of a politician. It was a harbor. His arms were strong, wrapping around her with a solidity that anchored her to the earth. One hand cradled the back of her head, pressing her cheek against his chest. "I am sorry." She muffled into his shirt. "Shh," Adrian soothed, his voice a low rumble against her ear. "You have nothing to apologize for. You survived. That is the only thing that matters." He held her while she cried, his hand stroking her hair. She could hear his heart beating beneath her ear, slow, steady, unshakable. It was the most comforting sound she had ever heard. Slowly, the tears subsided. Elena pulled back slightly, looking up at him. Her eyes were red, her face blotchy, but Adrian looked at her as if she were the most precious thing in the room. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice shaking, "for saving me, for hiding me." Adrian looked down at her. The distance between them had vanished. The air was thick again, but not with fear, with something else. He lifted his hand, cupping her jaw. His thumb brushed away a stray tear on her cheekbone. The roughness of his skin against hers was electric. He leaned in. He gave her every chance to pull away. He paused, his gaze searching hers, asking a silent question. Elena did not pull away. She leaned up. Their lips met. It was soft at first. A tentative exploration, a question asked and answered. But then Elena made a sound in her throat, a small whimper of need, and her fingers curled into the fabric of his shirt. The kiss deepened instantly. Adrian groaned low in his throat, his arm tightening around her waist, pulling her flush against him. It was a kiss of desperate hunger, a collision of two lonely souls who had found their match. Elena opened to him, tasting the bourbon and the danger, feeling a fire ignite in her belly that Charles had never even sparked. For a moment, the world fell away. There was only Adrian. Then, Adrian pulled back. He broke the kiss, breathing hard, his forehead resting against hers. His hands were gripping her waist as if he was afraid to let go, but he forced himself to stop. Elena blinked, dazed, her lips swollen. "Adrian?" she whispered. He closed his eyes for a second, then opened them. They were dark with desire, but clear. "I am not him." "Elena," he said, his voice rough, "I am not going to be another man who takes from you just because you are vulnerable. But I want—" Elena started. "I know," Adrian interrupted gently. "And God knows I want you, but not like this. Not when you are scared and grateful. When we do this, and we will do this, it will be because you chose it with a clear head, not because you needed an escape." He kissed her forehead, a tender, lingering touch. "Go to sleep, Elena. We have a war to fight tomorrow." He stepped away, leaving her standing in the living room, her body humming, her heart full. He was right. And the fact that he was right made her love him all the more. The morning sun brought no peace. Elena was in the kitchen pouring coffee. When the front door banged open, she jumped, nearly dropping the pot. One of Adrian's men, a young guy named Leo, burst in. He was out of breath, his face pale. "Boss!" Leo shouted. Adrian came out of the office instantly, a gun already in his hand, pointed at the floor. "What is it?" Adrian barked. "We have a problem," Leo panted. "A big one. One of the street crews just radioed in. Charles's private security is swarming the block." Adrian holstered the weapon, his face turning into a mask of stone. "How?" "Someone talked," Leo said grimly. "A tip came in about a woman matching Elena's description seen in the alley the night it rained. They are going door to door. Adrian, they are showing her picture." Elena froze, the coffee cup rattling in her hand. The bubble had popped. The safe haven was compromised. Adrian looked at Elena. The tenderness of the previous night was gone, replaced by the tactical calculation of a general under siege. "Pack your things," Adrian ordered. "We leave in 5 minutes." The reality of the world had found them, and this time, running might not be enough. The new safe house was nothing like the bakery loft. That had been a hideout. This was a fortress, located on the desolate northern edge of the city, where the skyline crumbled into abandoned shipyards and rusting warehouses. The building was a concrete monolith surrounded by chain-link fences topped with razor wire. Floodlights cut through the perpetual gray mist rolling off the river, and men with assault rifles slung across their chests patrolled the perimeter with the discipline of soldiers. Elena stood by the window of the command center on the 3rd floor, looking down at the yard. 2 black SUVs were being inspected by a team of mechanics. A guard dog, a massive Rottweiler, strained against its leash near the gate. "It is safer," Adrian said, coming up behind her. His reflection in the glass was grim. "The walls are reinforced. We have thermal cameras on every approach. No one gets within a mile of this place without us knowing." Elena wrapped her arms around herself. The heating system hummed loudly, battling the draft from the river, but the chill she felt was internal. "It feels like a prison," she said softly. Adrian did not deny it. He stepped closer, his presence a heavy, comforting weight at her back. "It is a fortress, Elena. A prison is designed to keep you in against your will. This is designed to keep the wolves out." He was right, of course. But as Elena watched the guards rotate shifts, she felt a familiar tightening in her chest. She had spent her life in the gilded cage of her parents' ambition, and then in the diamond-studded cage of Charles's possessiveness. Now, she was in a cage built of concrete and loyalty. It was still a cage. "I cannot just sit here, Adrian," Elena said, turning to face him. She saw the exhaustion etched into the lines around his eyes. He had been awake for 20 hours, coordinating the movement of his people, securing assets, fighting a war she had started. "I cannot just be the package you are guarding. I need to be useful." Adrian sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "You are staying alive. That is your job. That is not enough," Elena insisted, her voice gaining an edge of steel that surprised them both. "Charles is not just using brute force. He's using the system. He's using logistics. You know the streets, Adrian, but I know him. I know how he thinks. I know where he hides his skeletons because I was standing right next to the closet for 3 years." Adrian looked at her, really looked at her. He saw the fire in her eyes, the same defiance that had made her run into a rainy alley in a wedding dress. He realized then that treating her like a porcelain doll was an insult to the woman she was becoming. He gestured to the large oak table in the center of the room, covered in maps and scattered burner phones. "Pull up a chair," he said. "For the next 3 days, the command center became their world." Elena did not just help. She led. She sat at the head of the table, flanked by Adrian and his top lieutenants. While they spoke of territory and supply lines, Elena spoke of galas, fundraisers, and private meetings. "He plays golf every Tuesday morning at the country club, but not for the sport," Elena explained, pointing to a map of the affluent district. "He meets with the head of the union there because the club does not keep visitor logs for members. That is where the cash handovers happen." Adrian leaned over her shoulder, his eyes narrowing at the map. "We thought the union money was coming through the docks." "No," Elena said, tapping the location. "It is in the locker room of the clubhouse. And here..." She pointed to a boutique hotel downtown. He keeps a suite on the 4th floor permanently booked under a shell corporation. He uses it for meetings he does not want Holt to know about. If you want his personal ledger, the one he does not trust his accountant with, it is in the safe in that suite. The code is his mother's birthday." Adrian looked at her with a mixture of awe and darkening anger. Awe at her memory and strategic mind, anger at the intimacy of the knowledge, a reminder of how deeply Charles had embedded himself in her life. "We can get into that suite," Adrian said, glancing at Leo. "Send a team. If that ledger exists, we own him." The nights grew long. They ate takeout from styrofoam containers, fueled by stale coffee and adrenaline. The dynamic between them shifted. They were no longer just protector and protected. They were partners. One rainy Tuesday night, the breakthrough came. Leo's team had managed to clone the hard drive from the hotel suite's safe without triggering an alarm. Adrian's tech specialist had spent 6 hours decrypting the files. Around 2 in the morning, the specialist looked up, his face pale in the blue glow of the monitors. "Boss, you are going to want to see this." Elena and Adrian crowded around the screen. There, in black and white spreadsheets, was the proof. Millions of dollars in illicit donations funneled through offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands, directly linked to construction contracts Charles had approved as governor-elect, and more damningly, payments to a hitman service listed under consulting fees. "We have him," Adrian breathed. Elena stared at the screen, her heart pounding. It was not just rumors anymore. It was evidence. Adrian straightened up and turned to her. A slow, dangerous smile spread across his face. "This calls for a drink." He went to the cabinet in the corner and pulled out a bottle of red wine and 2 glasses. He poured them both a generous measure. "It is not the vintage you are used to," Adrian said, handing her a glass. "It is barely $20 a bottle. Try not to be offended." Elena took the glass, swirling the dark liquid. She took a sip and raised an eyebrow, a playful glint in her eyes. "It has notes of cardboard and regret," she teased. "But I suppose it will do." Adrian laughed, the sound warm and rich in the quiet room. "You are a snob. Elena Ward, and you, Adrian Costa, have the handwriting of a serial killer." She shot back, gesturing to the notes he had scrawled on the whiteboard. "I have seen doctors with better penmanship." "I had to squint to figure out if we were invading a warehouse or a Waffle House. I was in a rush," Adrian defended, stepping closer. "And for the record, I like waffles." They were standing close now. The laughter faded, replaced by a sudden, heavy silence. The victory on the screen was forgotten. The only thing that mattered was the space between them, which seemed to be shrinking with every breath. Elena looked up at him. The harsh overhead lights had been dimmed, leaving the room in a soft, amber shadow. Adrian looked tired, his tie loosened, his sleeves rolled up to reveal the tattoos she had come to memorize. He looked dangerous and safe all at once. "You are amazing," Adrian said softly. His voice was rough, stripping away her defenses. "The way you think, the way you fight, I underestimated you. I underestimated myself," Elena whispered. Adrian set his glass down on the table behind him. He reached out, his fingers brushing against her cheek as he tucked a loose strand of dark hair behind her ear. His touch was electric, sending a shiver racing down her spine that had nothing to do with the cold. Elena set her glass down too. Her hands were shaking. Adrian's gaze dropped to her lips, then back to her eyes. He was waiting, always waiting for her permission. Elena closed the distance. The kiss started slow, a testing of waters, but the moment their lips touched, the dam broke. Adrian made a low sound in his throat and backed her gently against the door frame of the office. His hands came up to frame her face, his thumbs stroking her cheekbones, tilting her head back to deepen the angle. Elena melted into him. It was not like the kiss at the apartment, born of tears and comfort. This was born of fire. It was the adrenaline of the victory mixed with days of simmering tension. She slid her hands up his chest, feeling the hard muscle beneath his shirt, and wrapped her arms around his neck, pulling him closer. Adrian's mouth was demanding, hot and urgent. He tasted of the cheap wine and something darker, something uniquely him. He pressed his hips against hers, pinning her to the wood, his hands sliding down to her waist to grip her firmly. Elena gasped against his mouth as his thumb drew maddening circles at the base of her skull. Every nerve ending in her body was singing. She felt alive, truly alive, for the first time in years. They stumbled backward, away from the office, moving blindly down the hallway toward the small bedroom Adrian had been using. They did not break the kiss, their breathing ragged and loud in the quiet corridor. Adrian reached behind him and pushed the bedroom door open. He guided her across the threshold, his hands roaming over her back, pulling her flush against him. But as they stepped into the darker room, a shadow of memory flashed through Elena's mind. She saw the hotel suite. She saw the heavy curtains. She felt the phantom grip of Charles's hand on her wrist, the feeling of being owned, of being trapped. She stiffened. It was a subtle reaction, a momentary freeze, but Adrian felt it instantly. He stopped. His hands, which had been sliding toward the hem of her shirt, halted. He pulled his mouth from hers, though he stayed close, his forehead resting against hers. His breathing was heavy, harsh in the silence, but he did not move to continue. "Elena?" he rasped. Elena stammered, her eyes wide, panic fluttering in her chest like a moth. She was terrified he would be angry, that he would push past it. That was what men did. That was what Charles would have done. Adrian pulled back enough to look her in the eye. His pupils were blown wide with desire, but his expression was fiercely gentle. "Hey," he said softly. "Look at me." Elena looked at him, trembling. "We stop," Adrian said. "But I want to," Elena whispered, tears of frustration pricking her eyes. "I do. It is okay," Adrian interrupted. He moved his hands from her waist to her shoulders, rubbing them soothingly. "You do not have to explain. I am not him." The words broke the spell of the panic. "I am not him." Adrian took a deep breath, calming his own racing heart. He brushed a thumb over her swollen lips. "Whatever happens between us, Elena, happens on your terms, when you are ready, not a second before. You are not running from fear tonight. You are making a choice, and if your choice is to stop, we stop." Elena let out a shaky breath, leaning her forehead against his chest. Can you just hold me?" she asked, her voice small. "Always," Adrian said. They did not undress. They kicked off their shoes and lay down on the narrow bed on top of the covers, fully clothed. Adrian lay on his back, one arm thrown over his eyes, while Elena curled into his side, her head resting on his chest. The darkness of the room was heavy, but not frightening. It felt like a cocoon. Elena traced the lines of the tattoo on his forearm with her fingertip. It was a compass. She realized, broken, but pointing north. "My grandfather gave me that idea," Adrian said quietly into the dark, feeling her touch. "He used to say that even when the world breaks you, you have to know where your north is." "What is your north?" Elena asked. "For a long time. It was revenge," Adrian admitted. "It was making Charles pay for my father. And now?" Adrian turned his head to look at her, his face inches from hers in the shadows. "Now," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper, "I think the needle is moving." He told her then about the nights he spent in juvenile detention while his father was on trial. He told her about the shame of visiting a prison, seeing a good man wither away. He told her how he had built his empire not out of greed, but out of a desperate need to be so powerful that no one could ever victimize his family again. Elena listened, her heart aching for the boy he had been. She realized that Charles had created them both. He had forged Adrian in the fire of injustice, and he had chiseled Elena out of the ice of expectation. They were opposites, yet they fit together perfectly in the space between the fire and the ice. She fell asleep with her hand over his heart, the steady rhythm lulling her into a dreamless peace. The peace lasted exactly 6 hours. The next morning, the fortress was in chaos. Elena woke to the sound of shouting in the hallway. She sat up, alone in the bed. Adrian was gone. She hurried out to the command center. The atmosphere was poisonous. Phones were ringing off the hook. Men were shouting orders into radios. Adrian stood at the main table, his face a mask of fury. He was gripping a phone so hard the plastic creaked. "How many?" Adrian barked into the receiver. He listened for a moment, then slammed the phone down. "What happened?" Elena asked, stepping to his side. Adrian looked at her. His eyes were hard. The tenderness of the night before locked away behind a wall of tactical rage. "He hit us," Adrian said. "Charles, he did not come for this safe house. He went for the foundation." Leo stepped forward, holding a tablet. At dawn, state troopers and federal agents executed simultaneous raids on 6 of our legitimate businesses: the construction sites, the shipping logistics hub, even the bakery below your old apartment. They froze the accounts, Adrian said, his voice deadly calm. The payroll accounts, the operational funds, They arrested 12 of my men on warrants that are 10 years old, warrants that should have been expunged. He's using the state, Elena realized, horror dawning on her. He's not fighting like a criminal. He's fighting like a governor. He's trying to starve us out, Adrian said. He knows he cannot storm this building without a war he cannot explain to the press. So he is cutting off the blood supply. If I cannot pay my men, if I cannot move product, the organization crumbles. He's trying to force me to hand you over. Elena looked at the screens showing the news feeds, live footage of police vans loading handcuffed men who had protected her, into the back of trucks. This is my fault, she whispered. No, Adrian snapped, turning to her. This is his fault. Do not ever confuse the arsonist with the person trying to put out the fire. But we cannot win this way, Elena said, her mind racing. You have guns. Adrian, you have soldiers. But he has the law. He has the judges. He has the banks. You cannot shoot your way out of a frozen bank account. Adrian ran a hand through his hair, looking trapped. Then what do? We go underground? We disappear? No, Elena said. She walked to the window, looking out at the gray morning. The time for running was over. She was done hiding in safe houses. She was done letting men bleed for her while she sat in a tower. We stop playing his game, she said, turning back to him. We stop hiding. Adrian frowned. What are you saying? We go public, Elena said. The room went silent. Leo looked at Adrian. Adrian looked at Elena as if she had grown a second head. You want to turn yourself in? Adrian asked slowly. No, Elena said. I want to blow the whistle. She walked back to the table, placing her hands flat on the map of the city. Charles's power comes from his image, the silver fox, the perfect politician, the grieving husband. As long as I am the missing, unstable wife, he controls the narrative. He can use the police to hunt me because he claims he is saving me. She looked up, her eyes blazing. But if I speak, if I stand up and tell the world that the governor is a murderer and a thief, if I show them the documents we found last night, then the police cannot work for him anymore. The feds will have to investigate him, not you. It is suicide. Elena, Adrian said, shaking his head, the moment you show your face, you are a target. If he knows where you are, he will try to kill me. Elena finished. I know, but he is already trying to kill you. He's destroying everything you built. She took a step closer to him, ignoring the guards watching them. I know a journalist. She said, Sarah Jenkins. She writes for the Chronicle. She's been trying to investigate the campaign finance rumors for years, but she never had a source. I trust her. We give her the files. We give her the story. Adrian stared at her. He hated it. Every instinct in his body screamed to keep her hidden, to keep her behind these concrete walls where he could stand between her and the world. But he looked at the screens showing his empire under siege. He looked at the exhaustion in his men's faces. He looked at Elena. She was not the trembling girl in the wet wedding dress anymore. She was a queen moving her own piece on the board. If we do this, Adrian said, his voice low, there is no going back. Once that story breaks, the sky falls. He will come for us with everything he has left. He will not care about exposure anymore. He will just want us dead. I know, Elena said. She reached out and took his hand, intertwining her fingers with his. But I am tired of being afraid. Adrian, I want my life back, and I want a life with you. The only way we get that is if we take him down. Adrian looked at their joined hands. He squeezed her fingers, a silent vow. Okay, he said, looking up at Leo. Get the encrypted drives and find this Sarah Jenkins. He turned back to Elena, lifting her hand to his lips and kissing her knuckles. We do it your way, Elena. But when the storm hits, you stay behind me. I will stand beside you, she corrected. Adrian smiled, a sharp, dangerous expression that promised violence to anyone who threatened her. Beside me. Then. They began to prepare the package. Files were copied, timelines were written, and encrypted messages were drafted. As the sun set over the fortified warehouse, the mood had shifted from desperation to a grim, focused determination. They were about to light a match and drop it into a powder keg, and for the first time, Elena Ward was not afraid of the explosion. She was the one holding the match. The headline on the screen was simple, bold, and devastating. Governor-linked accounts tied to organized crime and shadow funds. Elena stood in the center of the command room at the safe house, her arms crossed tight against her chest, watching the broadcast. It was the lead story on every major network. The journalist, Sarah Jenkins, had done exactly what she promised. She had taken the encrypted files, the frantic notes Elena had scribbled about meeting times and locations, and the sheer volume of financial data Adrian's team had unearthed, and she had woven them into a damning tapestry. On the television, a serious-looking anchor spoke over graphics showing money laundering trails leading from construction contracts directly into offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. Anonymous sources close to the governor's inner circle allege a pattern of intimidation, bribery, and misuse of campaign funds dating back 3 years. The anchor said. Elena felt a strange, cold vibration in her chest. Those were her words. The anonymous source was the woman who was supposed to be the smiling, silent ornament on Charles's arm. She had broken the glass case she had been living in, and the shards were finally drawing blood. Charles appeared on the screen next. It was a press conference held on the steps of the Capitol just an hour ago. He looked furious, though he was trying to mask it with righteous indignation. His silver hair was perfectly in place, but his eyes were hard, flinty things that Elena knew too well. "These allegations are fabricated," Charles declaimed, gripping the podium. "They are a desperate smear campaign orchestrated by rival political factions and criminal organizations trying to destabilize our state. We will find the people responsible for these lies, and they will face the full weight of the law. Criminal organizations." Adrian walked up beside her, his presence a wall of heat against the chill of the room. He watched the screen with a dark, unreadable expression. "He knows," Adrian said quietly. "He knows the leak came from us. He's trying to frame the narrative before the evidence fully lands." "He looks cornered," Elena observed, looking at the tightness of Charles's jaw. "A cornered animal is the most dangerous kind," Adrian replied. He turned to Leo, his second in command. "How are the servers? We are scrubbing the digital trail," Leo said, typing furiously at a terminal. "But Holt's team is good. They are backtracing the IP addresses we used to send the files. They are pinging cell towers near our known locations. We need to move the physical records," Adrian said, making a snap decision. "The hard copies from the warehouse on the east side. If Holt raids that location and finds the original ledgers before we can get them to the feds, the digital leak will look like a forgery." "I am coming with you," Elena said. "No," Adrian said instantly. "You stay here. I know the filing system," Elena argued, grabbing her coat. "The ledgers are mixed in with the dummy corporation files. You will not know what to look for, and we do not have time for you to read every page." Adrian looked at her. He saw the set of her jaw, the same stubbornness that had kept her alive in the alley. He did not have time to argue. "Fine," he said, "but you wear a vest. And you stay glued to my side." The drive to the warehouse was tense, the city blurred by a relentless gray drizzle. The warehouse was located in an industrial park that had seen better days, a maze of corrugated metal and rusted shipping containers. They pulled up to the rear entrance. Adrian's men fanned out, weapons drawn, securing the perimeter. Adrian helped Elena out of the car, his hand heavy and protective on her lower back. "Quickly," he ordered, "in and out, 5 minutes, inside." The air was stale and dusty. Rows of metal shelving towered above them, stacked with boxes. Elena moved immediately to the third aisle, scanning the labels. "Here," she said, pulling a heavy box from the shelf. "These are the construction invoices. The real ones are taped to the bottom of the intake forms." Adrian's men began grabbing the indicated boxes. It was going smoothly, too smoothly. Suddenly, the radio on Adrian's shoulder crackled. "Boss, incoming, 3 SUVs, no plates." "They are breaching the gate. "Get her out," Adrian roared. Spinning around before they could move, the sound of tires screeching on concrete echoed from outside, followed immediately by the thunderous crash of the main bay doors being rammed. Glass shattered high above them as a window blew in. Gunfire erupted, the sharp cracks echoing off the metal walls like a hammer striking an anvil. "Down!" Adrian shouted. He did not just yell, he moved. He tackled Elena, his momentum carrying them both behind a thick stack of wooden crates filled with engine parts. They hit the concrete floor hard, dust billowing up around them. Bullets pinged off the metal shelving where she had been standing a second ago, sending showers of sparks and paper raining down. "Stay down," Adrian commanded, his voice rough. He was hovering over her, his body a human shield, covering every inch of her vital organs with his own. The warehouse was a chaotic symphony of noise. Shouting, the roar of engines, the relentless pop-pop-pop of automatic weapons. Holt's men were not here to arrest anyone. They were here to erase a problem. "We are pinned," Leo shouted from somewhere to their left. Adrian drew his weapon. He looked down at Elena, his dark eyes fierce and terrified for her. "When I say move, you run for the side exit," he told her. "Do not look back. Do not stop. I am not leaving you." Elena screamed over the noise. "You are leaving because if they catch you, they kill you," Adrian yelled back. He raised up slightly to fire suppressive shots over the crate. The return fire was immediate and withering. A bullet struck the wood inches from his face, sending splinters flying. "Now," Adrian yelled. "Go!" He grabbed her arm and hauled her up, shoving her toward the narrow service door 20 feet away. He positioned himself between her and the shooters, firing steadily to keep their heads down. Elena ran. Her feet scrambled on the dusty concrete. She could hear the bullets whizzing through the air, angry hornets seeking flesh. She reached the door and shoved it open. She turned back to look for Adrian. He was right behind her, backing up, his gun still raised. Then she saw it, a jerk of his body, violent and unnatural. He stumbled. "Adrian!" she screamed. He gritted his teeth, his face going pale, but he did not fall. He lunged through the doorway, slamming the heavy steel door shut behind him and throwing the bolt. A second later, heavy thuds impacted the metal from the other side. "To the car!" Adrian gasped. He was moving slower now. His hand was pressed to his left side, just above his hip. Dark. Slick blood was already seeping through his fingers, staining his white shirt crimson. Elena rushed to him, wrapping her arm around his waist to support him. "You are hit," she cried, panic rising in her throat like bile. "It is just a graze," Adrian gritted out, though his breath was coming in short, pained hitches. "Keep moving." They staggered through the rain toward the waiting sedan. Leo was already there, laying down cover fire as another enemy vehicle rounded the corner. "Get them in!" Leo shouted. Elena shoved Adrian into the back seat and scrambled in after him. The car peeled away before the door was fully closed, tires smoking as they sped out of the industrial park. In the back seat, the adrenaline began to fade, replaced by cold terror. Adrian had slumped back against the leather, his eyes half closed. His hand had fallen away from his side, and the wound was bleeding freely now, soaking his waistband and the seat. "Adrian," Elena said, her voice trembling. She pressed her hands directly onto the wound. The blood was hot and sticky. "Look at me. Do not close your eyes." Adrian looked at her. His skin was gray, beads of sweat mixing with the rain on his forehead, but his eyes were fixed on her face. "I am okay," he whispered, though his voice lacked its usual strength. "You are not okay," Elena said, tears finally spilling over. She pressed harder, trying to keep the life inside him. "You promised me protection. You cannot protect me if you die, so you are not allowed to die. Do you hear me? I hear you." Adrian managed a faint, pained smile. "You are very bossy when you are scared. I am terrified," Elena admitted, her tears falling onto his bloodied shirt. "Please, Adrian, just stay with me." The ride back to the safe house felt like it took a lifetime. Every bump in the road drew a sharp hiss of breath from Adrian. By the time they arrived, Elena's dress, the simple gray wool one she had changed into that morning, was ruined, stiff with his blood. Leo and two other men carried Adrian into the medical room on the first floor. It was set up for this kind of life. Sterile tables, bright lights, cabinets full of gauze and sutures. "I can do it," Elena said, pushing past a guard who tried to hold her back. "I know basic first aid. I am not leaving him." She washed her hands at the sink, scrubbing until her skin was raw, then snapped on a pair of gloves. The bullet had indeed grazed him, carving a deep furrow along his side, tearing muscle and skin but missing the internal organs. It was ugly, and it bled profusely. But it was not fatal. Elena worked alongside the medic, her hands shaking as she cut away his shirt. She cleaned the wound with antiseptic, wincing as Adrian's body jerked involuntarily from the sting. "I am sorry," she whispered. "Just do it." Adrian breathed through clenched teeth. She helped stitch the wound closed, her focus absolute, as she wiped the blood from his skin with a warm cloth, tracing the hard muscles of his abdomen. The reality of what had happened crashed into her. He had taken a bullet for her. He had not hesitated. He had thrown his body in front of hers without a second thought. Charles had bruised her wrist to teach her a lesson. Adrian had let himself be torn open to keep her safe. The contrast broke her heart wide open. She was not just grateful. She was in love with him, deeply, irrevocably in love with the criminal who had more honor in his little finger than the governor had in his entire administration. That night, the safe house was quiet, but the silence was heavy with the threat of what was coming next. Adrian was in the bedroom, resting. The fever from the trauma had set in, making him restless. Elena stood in the doorway, watching him toss and turn. She could not be alone. The fear was a cold companion in her own room. She walked to the bed. "Adrian," she whispered. His eyes opened. They were glassy with fever, but they sharpened when they landed on her. "Elena? What is wrong? Is Holt here?" "No," she said softly. "No one is here. Just us." She climbed onto the bed. She did not ask for permission this time. She needed to be close to him. She lay down on his uninjured side, resting her head carefully on his shoulder. "I was afraid I would lose you," she whispered into the darkness. Adrian's arm came around her, holding her close. His skin was burning hot, but his grip was solid. "It takes more than a scratch to kill me," he murmured. It was not a scratch. "Adrian, there was so much blood." Elena shifted, propping herself up on her elbow to look down at him. The moonlight filtering through the blinds cast stripes across his face. "I am terrified," she confessed, her voice barely a breath. "I am terrified of Charles. I am terrified of what happens tomorrow. But mostly, I am terrified of loving a man whose life is constantly in danger. I do not know if I can survive watching you bleed again." Adrian went still. His hand came up to cup her cheek, his thumb stroking her skin. "You love me?" he asked, his voice filled with a wonder that sounded almost boyish. Elena leaned into his touch. "Yes, God help me, I do." Adrian let out a long, ragged breath. "I would rather face every enemy I have ever made," he said, his eyes locking onto hers with an intensity that burned brighter than his fever. "I would rather take a bullet every day for the rest of my life than imagine a world where you go back to him, or a world where you are not with me." The confession hung in the air, raw and absolute. Elena lowered her head. Their lips met. This time, there was no hesitation. There was no panic. There was only a desperate, consuming need to affirm life in the face of death. The kiss deepened, becoming heated and urgent. Elena pressed her body along the length of his, careful of his side but needing to feel every inch of him. She needed to know he was here, alive, hers. Adrian groaned, his hand tangling in her hair, pulling her closer. "Elena," he breathed against her mouth. "Are you sure?" "I am sure," she whispered. "I choose this. I choose you." Clothes were pushed aside, disregarded in the urgency of the moment. There was no performance here. There were no cameras, no expectations of perfection. There was only skin on skin, heat on heat. Elena curled into him, burying her face in the curve of his neck, inhaling his scent, sweat, antiseptic, and the underlying musk that was purely Adrian. She felt his hands on her, reverent and possessive all at once. mapping her body as if he were memorizing a sacred text. She gasped as he moved with her, a sound of pure release. For the first time in her life, she was not an object, she was a participant. She was desired not for what she represented, but for who she was. Adrian cradled her face, his forehead resting against hers. "You are free," he murmured, his voice rough with emotion. "This is yours. You are mine and I am yours, and no one owns us." The rest of the world faded away. There was only the sanctuary of the bed, the tangle of limbs, and the reclaiming of their hearts from the man who had tried to crush them both. The hours before dawn were blue and quiet. The rain had finally stopped, leaving a heavy mist clinging to the windows. Elena lay awake, tracing the line of Adrian's jaw as he slept fitfully. Her mind was racing. They had won a battle at the warehouse, but they were losing the war. Holt would not stop. Charles would not stop. As long as Charles held the power of the governor's office, they would be hunted. They would live in safe houses, looking over their shoulders, until one day a bullet did not miss. She could not let that happen. She would not let Adrian die for her. Adrian stirred, waking with a sharp intake of breath as he moved his injured side. "Easy," Elena soothed, placing a hand on his chest. He blinked. Focusing on her, he smiled, a tired, genuine smile that reached his eyes. "Best sleep I have had in years," he rasped, "despite the hole in my side." Elena did not smile back. Her face was serious. "We have to end this. Adrian, today." Adrian pushed himself up slightly, wincing. "What are you thinking?" "We cannot run forever," Elena said, "and the leaks are not enough. He's spinning them. He is calling them fake news. We need something undeniable. We need a confession." "A confession?" Adrian scoffed. "Charles Mercer does not confess. He destroys. He confesses when he thinks he has won," Elena said quietly. "When he thinks he is in control. He is arrogant, Adrian. His hubris is his only weakness." She sat up, Sue pulling the sheet around her. "I am going to call him. I am going to tell him I want to negotiate. I am going to tell him I am tired of running and I want to come home." Adrian sat up fully, ignoring the pain. "No," he said firmly, "absolutely not. You are not going near him. I have to," Elena insisted. "I will wear a wire. I will get him to admit to the hit on the journalist. I will get him to admit to framing your father. If I can get his voice on tape, admitting to crimes, the feds will have no choice. The police will have to arrest him." "It is a trap," Adrian argued, his voice rising. "He will kill you the moment he sees you." "He won't," Elena said. "He needs me. He needs the public to see us reunited to clear his name. He needs the photo op. He will not hurt me until he gets what he wants. It is too dangerous. Elena, I will not let you do it." Elena turned to him, her eyes fierce. "You do not let me do anything. Adrian, it is my choice. You told me I was free. Freedom means making the hard calls." Adrian stared at her, frustration and fear warring in his face. He looked at the bandage on his side, then at her determined face. He realized he could not stop her. She was not the same woman he had pulled out of the alley. She was a fighter now. "I hate this," he said, his voice dropping. "I hate everything about this." "I know," Elena said, softening, "but it is the only way to get our life back." They sat in silence for a long moment, the weight of the decision pressing down on them. "One condition," Adrian said finally. "Name it. I am there. Me and my men. We will be in the building. We will be listening to the feed. If he touches you, if he so much as raises his voice in a way I do not like, we breach the room. I do not care about the evidence. I do not care about the law. I will put a bullet in him myself." Elena nodded. Agreed. She shifted, moving to sit on his lap. Careful of his wound, she pressed her forehead against his. "I will not let him break me again," she promised, her voice steady. "I am not his victim anymore. I am his reckoning." Adrian wrapped his arms around her, holding her tight, burying his face in her neck. "If this goes wrong," he started, his voice cracking. "It won't," Elena whispered, "because you are with me." They held each other in the blue light of dawn, two battered souls preparing to walk into the fire one last time. It felt like a goodbye, but Elena prayed it was a beginning. The phone weighed 1,000 pounds in Elena Ward's hand. She stood in the center of the fortified safe house, the concrete walls humming with the electronic activity of Adrian's team. But she felt entirely alone in the moment. She dialed the number she had memorized years ago, a direct line that bypassed secretaries and aides. It rang twice. "Holt!" A voice barked. "It is me," Elena said, forcing a tremor into her voice that was only half feigned. "Tell him I am tired. Holt, tell him I want to come home." There was a silence on the line, heavy and calculating. Then, Charles's voice took over. It was smooth, practically vibrating with triumph. "Elena, my dear, I knew you would come to your senses eventually. I made a mistake." Charles, Elena lied, staring at a map of the city pinned to the wall. "I'm scared. I do not want to be a fugitive anymore. I want to fix this." "Good," Charles purred. "We have a fundraiser tonight at the Grand Meridian, the Children's Hospital Gala. It is the perfect stage for a reunion. Meet me there. We will smile for the cameras, show the world we are united, and then, well, then we will discuss your penance in private. I will be there," Elena whispered, and ended the call. She looked up. Adrian was standing 3 feet away, his face pale from his injury but his jaw set like granite. He hated this plan. It was written in the tension of his shoulders and the dark fire in his eyes. But he respected her enough not to stop her. "We are green," Leo called out from the monitoring station. "The audio link is stable." Elena went to the table where a jewelry box sat open. Inside was a necklace, a heavy sapphire pendant surrounded by diamonds. It was gaudy, exactly the kind of thing Charles liked to see her wear, but the stone had been hollowed out to house a high-fidelity microphone. Adrian picked up the necklace. He walked behind her, his movement stiff from the bandage wrapped around his midsection. He clasped the chain around her neck, his fingers lingering on her skin. "If he touches you," Adrian murmured near her ear, his voice rough, "I am kicking the doors in. I do not care about the confession. I care about you." "He will not have the chance," Elena promised. Turning to face him, she smoothed the lapel of his jacket. "Just stay close. I am always close," Adrian said. The Grand Meridian Hotel was a fortress of limestone and light. Limousines idled at the curb, depositing the city's elite onto a red carpet flanked by shivering photographers. Elena stepped out of the black town car alone. She had chosen her armor carefully. She was not wearing the demure pastels Charles preferred. She wore a gown of midnight blue velvet, structured and sharp, with a neckline that showcased the sapphire pendant. Her hair was not in a chignon but loose, cascading over her shoulders in dark waves. She looked like a queen returning to claim a throne, not a runaway wife begging for forgiveness. As the cameras flashed, blinding and chaotic, she felt a phantom warmth at her back. She looked across the street to where a nondescript delivery van was parked in the shadows. She knew Adrian was inside. She knew his team was tapping into the hotel security feeds right now. And she knew that blocks away, unmarked cars filled with federal agents, alerted by Sarah Jenkins and armed with the preliminary evidence, were waiting for the signal. She walked up the stairs. Charles was waiting in the foyer. He looked impeccable in a tuxedo, the very image of the grieving husband relieved of his burden. When he saw her, his eyes lit up, not with love, but with possession. "Elena!" he exclaimed, loud enough for the press to hear. He rushed forward and pulled her into a hug. His arms were like iron bands. To the cameras, it looked like relief. To Elena, it felt like a python constricting its prey. "You look stunning," he whispered into her ear, his voice dropping to a venomous hiss. "But you and I are going to have a very long talk about loyalty once we get home. Smile, Elena. The voters are watching." Elena forced a smile, her skin crawling where his hands pressed into her back. "I missed you." "Charles," she said, her voice loud and clear for the necklace to pick up. He steered her through the ballroom. People applauded. Donors reached out to touch her arm, offering congratulations on her safe return. It was a grotesque pantomime. Elena felt like screaming, but she kept her head high, letting Charles parade her around like a trophy he had successfully retrieved from the lost and found. Let us go somewhere quieter, Charles said after 20 minutes of handshakes. I think we need a moment. He led her toward the VIP lounge at the back of the hall. Holt was standing guard at the door. He gave Elena a cold, dead-eyed stare as he opened it for them, then stepped inside and locked it behind him. The lounge was soundproofed, filled with leather sofas and expensive art. The roar of the party disappeared, replaced by a suffocating silence. Charles released her arm and walked to the bar to pour a drink. He downed it in one swallow and turned around. The charming smile was gone. In its place was a sneer of pure contempt. You humiliated me, Charles spat, slamming the glass down. Do you have any idea how much this week has cost me? The bribes I had to pay to keep the editors from running certain stories? The favors I had to call in? I was scared. Charles, Elena said, standing in the center of the room, clutching her purse. I heard you on the phone. That night at the hotel? Charles laughed, a harsh, barking sound. You heard me on the phone? That is why you ran? Because you heard how the sausage is made. Grow up. Elena. Power is not pretty. It is necessary. You talked about killing a journalist. Elena pushed, her heart hammering against her ribs. You talked about an overdose. So? Charles shrugged, walking toward her. He was a junkie. No one misses a junkie. And he was going to print lies about the campaign finances. I did what had to be done to protect our future. In the van outside, Adrian sat with headphones on, his knuckles white as he gripped the edge of the console. We have it, Leo whispered, pointing to the recording levels. Admission of conspiracy to commit murder. Keep him talking, Adrian commanded under his breath. Get it all? Elena, inside the lounge. Elena took a step back, feigning terror. And the construction contracts, she asked. The money in the Caymans? The news said you were working with criminals. I am the governor-elect, Charles shouted, his ego flaring up exactly as Elena had predicted. I do not work for criminals. They work for me. I used Costa's organization to move the funds because they are expendable, just like you are expendable if you do not learn your place. He grabbed her shoulders, his fingers digging into her flesh. You think you can run to that thug, to Costa? Charles sneered, his face inches from hers. I know he helped you. I know you were with him. And once I am sworn in next week, I am going to use the National Guard to wipe his little empire off the map. I will make sure Adrian Costa disappears forever. And if you ever try to leave me again, you will disappear with him. In the van. Adrian ripped the headphones off. The rage that had been simmering in his gut boiled over. He did not care about the plan anymore. He did not care about the timeline. Charles had threatened her life. Move! Adrian roared into his radio. Take the building, now. Inside the ballroom. The polite ambiance shattered. The side doors burst open. Federal agents in windbreakers swarmed the room, guns drawn. At the same time, Adrian's men, dressed in dark tactical gear, cut off the exits to the kitchen and the service elevators, neutralizing Holt's perimeter team with efficient, brutal precision. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a federal raid, a voice boomed over the speakers. Clear the area! Screams erupted. Donors in tuxedos scrambled for cover, overturning tables in the VIP lounge. The noise of the chaos penetrated the soundproofing. Holt's head snapped toward the door. Something is wrong, Holt said, reaching for his shoulder holster. Before he could draw, the heavy double doors of the lounge exploded inward. Adrian did not wait for the police. He kicked the door open, his gun raised, his eyes blazing with a fury that could burn the world down. Step away from her, Adrian bellowed. Holt reacted on instinct. He grabbed Elena, hauling her backward, pressing the barrel of his gun to her temple. Back off, Holt screamed. I will kill her. Charles stood frozen, his drink halfway to his mouth, staring at the man he thought he had crushed. Adrian froze, his weapon trained on Holt's head. His heart stopped. He saw the gun against Elena's skin, and for a second, the terror was paralyzing. But Elena was not the same woman who had cowered in the bathroom. She saw Adrian's hesitation. She saw the agent stacking up in the hallway behind him. She knew Holt was distracted by Adrian. She moved. She stomped her heel down onto Holt's instep with all her strength, just as Adrian had taught her. As Holt flinched, She dropped her weight and drove her elbow backward into his ribs. It was not perfect form, but it was enough. The gun slipped from her temple. Adrian did not miss. He lunged forward, not firing, but using the pistol as a blunt instrument. He struck Holt across the face, sending the security chief crashing to the floor. Federal agents poured into the room, shouting commands. "Holt, on the ground!" Elena scrambled away, breathless. Charles, seeing his world collapsing, made a desperate grab for her arm. "You ungrateful bitch!" he snarled, trying to pull her toward a hidden service door behind the bar. "You are coming with me!" Elena stopped. She did not run. She planted her feet, ripped her arm from his grasp, and turned to face him. Her eyes were dry. Her voice was steady. "No, Charles," she said. "I am done letting you write my future." Charles stared at her, stunned by her defiance. In that second of hesitation, the agents were on him. "Charles Mercer, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, racketeering, and money laundering." Two agents slammed Charles against the bar, pulling his arms behind his back. The handcuffs clicked, a sharp, final sound that echoed in the silence. Adrian stood by the door, his chest heaving, his gun lowered. He watched Elena. She stood tall in her midnight blue gown, watching the man who had tormented her being read his rights. She looked like a statue of justice. Charles looked back at her as he was dragged away, his face a mask of hate. But Elena did not look away. She watched him go until the doors closed. Then, and only then, did she turn to Adrian. She crossed the room in 3 strides. Adrian holstered his weapon and opened his arms, ignoring the pain in his side. She collided with him, burying her face in his chest. "You got him," Adrian whispered into her hair, holding her so tight he thought he might crush her. "You did it, Elena." "We did it," she corrected, pulling back to look at him. In the aftermath, the city was in an uproar. The footage of the governor-elect being led out of the Grand Meridian in handcuffs was played on a loop in Times Square. Elena chose to speak. She stood at a podium outside the federal courthouse the next morning. The wind whipped her hair across her face, but she did not hide. "For years, I was a symbol," she told the sea of microphones. "I was a prop in a play written by a man who believed he was above the law. But silence is not loyalty. Silence is complicity. I am here today to break that silence." She spoke of the corruption. She spoke of the fear. She carefully navigated the questions about her disappearance, alluding to unexpected allies who had given her sanctuary, protecting Adrian's identity with the skill of a seasoned diplomat. She would not let the law come for the man who had saved her. Months passed, the snow melted, giving way to a tentative spring. The scandal of the Mercer administration was slowly fading from the front pages, replaced by newer, louder news. Charles was awaiting trial in a federal supermax. His bail denied, his assets seized, his legacy was ashes. On the south side of the city, in a renovated industrial building overlooking the river, the evening light was golden and warm. Adrian had kept his promise. He was divesting. It was a slow, messy process. You did not just walk away from the mob overnight, but he was moving his capital into legitimate ventures. He was building affordable housing on the lots where his warehouses used to be. He was still a man to be feared, but he was no longer a man at war. Elena walked up the stairs to the penthouse apartment. She had spent the day at the community center she had started, a foundation for women escaping domestic abuse. She was tired, but it was a good tired. She unlocked the door. The apartment was dim, illuminated only by dozens of candles placed on the tables and the floor. The soft, flickering light reflected in the floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the river. It reminded her of the wedding night, the candles, the silence. But the feeling was entirely different. There was no dread here. There was only peace. Adrian walked out of the bedroom. He was wearing simple slacks and a white button-down shirt, unbuttoned at the collar. He looked relaxed, the tension that had defined him for so long finally easing from his shoulders. "Welcome home," he said softly. Elena smiled, dropping her bag and kicking off her shoes. "You are romantic tonight, Mr. Costa," she teased, walking toward him. "I thought we should make new memories," Adrian said, "to replace the old ones." He held out his hand. Elena took it. His grip was warm, solid, and safe. She stepped closer, her fingers lingering on the buttons of his shirt. She undid one, then another, watching his eyes darken with affection and desire. Adrian's hands rested respectfully at her waist, waiting, always waiting for her lead. She looked up at him. She saw the scar on his chin, the history in his eyes, the love that he didn't have to speak to make her feel. They moved together, a slow, unhurried dance. Their kisses were deep, tasting of the history they had survived. They pressed together, body to body, fitting like two jagged pieces of glass that had finally been fused into something whole. They moved toward the bedroom, the candlelight casting long, dancing shadows on the walls. Elena laughed softly against his mouth as they fell onto the bed, a sound of pure, unadulterated joy. "You are free." "Elena," Adrian murmured, his voice rough as he hovered over her, bracing his weight so he wouldn't crush her. "I know," she whispered, pulling him down. "I am yours." The candles flickered and burned low, watching over two people who had once lived in cages, now choosing each other in the most ordinary, extraordinary way. The sun rose the next morning, spilling liquid gold over the tangled sheets. Elena woke first. She lay still for a moment, feeling the heavy weight of Adrian's arm draped over her waist, his breath even and deep against her neck. She looked at the sunlight hitting the floorboards. She thought of the girl who had fled down a service stairwell in a $20,000 dress, barefoot and terrified. She thought of the rain, the alley, and the gun in Adrian's pocket. She smiled, stretching her hand out into the sunbeam. She hadn't just found salvation in a mafia boss's arms. She had found the courage to save herself. And then, she had found the courage to love the man who had met her halfway in the dark. She closed her eyes, breathing in the morning air, and for the first time in her life, she didn't just hope for the future. She looked forward to it. Thank you so much for listening to the story of Elena and Adrian. I hope you enjoyed this journey of danger, redemption, and love. I would love to hear from you. Please leave a comment below letting me know where in the world you are listening from. If you enjoyed this story, please consider subscribing to Mafia Romance Stories for more passionate and thrilling tales. Feel free to share your thoughts on the ending in English in the comments section. Until next time.